Welcome, everyone. I'm really excited to be sharing this conversation with you all today. I am joined by some of my favorite human beings. These are the ACW coaches at this point in time. We are joined by Natalie, Brian, and Yvette, and myself, as you probably know, Danielle Dinkelman, co-founder of Advanced Corporate Wellness. We are going to be talking today about what the power of coaching is, and specifically in an employment setting of how we can use wellness coaching to help folks with their professional performance. And, from an employer standpoint, I get to talk a lot with folks as we talk about bringing coaching programs into their companies. What is the power of wellness coaching when it comes to retention? So these folks have been in the coaching space, in the corporate wellness space with me and in other settings for some time now. And I'm just hoping to help listeners kind of get a sense of what is the impact that coaching can have, and what is this coaching thing all about? Because it is a very specific craft that we're talking about. So we're going to maybe pull back the curtain and help folks understand a little bit of the depth that there is to wellness coaching. So I want to get started with first our thoughts on how wellness coaching impacts employee performance. Does anyone want to jump in on how you have seen that with the folks that you've worked with? How do you see the wellness coaching you're doing on an individual basis translate to how they're showing up at work? Does anybody have any thoughts they want to kick us off with?
Yeah, I can start. So when I think about impact on employee performance, I really think coaching does help employees identify those personal roadblocks, really have that space and time to, discuss with someone that in a non-judgmental space, and, kind of improve and align their actions towards their own workplace goals. So just really having that space and time to discuss those things, because day to day I feel like things can get so busy and we often don't give ourselves that time and space to maybe identify those areas.
Yeah, I think that's really powerful, Natalie. And what you're sharing there makes me kind of go to what I talk a lot with about with employers, is that the employees know that the coaching they're receiving from us is confidential, and it's about them. It's not meant to be something that then gets reported back to management. So it really is a very safe space for them to really be honest and vulnerable with how things really are feeling in their job and at work, that they probably aren't sharing with supervisors, because there's a power dynamic at play and their livelihood is involved. So it does create a safe space for those conversations. Thank you. Brian, do you have any thoughts on this? How does coaching, how have you seen it impact the folks that you've worked with in their professional performance?
Yeah, I think a couple of things come to mind off the bat. One is, if people are taking care of themselves, better care of themselves, or things at home, a lot of times kind of home life, personal life, you end up showing up to work with greater vitality, greater energy, a better attitude, all these kinds of things. So that's one piece of it, where you're not even necessarily focusing specifically on work performance. It's just kind of doing the things of your own personal care and your own family life, if you have family at home, or what you're doing in your neighborhood, and all that kind of stuff can kind of feed into your energy at work. So that's one thing that's worth mentioning. And then the other thing too is, I just think specifically, a lot of times what will happen is someone is struggling with, work relationships, so interpersonal relationships. Maybe it's a leader that's having a hard time with his or her staff, or somebody that's having a hard time with their colleagues in particular. So just working through questions of, how do I cultivate this relationship? How do I interact with these people in a way that brings life and brings encouragement and brings support to one another in the work context. So that's another piece, is just kind of, how do I improve my relationships specifically with the people that I'm maybe struggling with, or if they're going pretty well, how do we take them to the next level, to make sure that we're even more productive and contributing to an organizational culture that we all want to be a part of. And then thirdly, I mean, honestly, sometimes I'll work with people who are already under some kind of a disciplinary action process at work. And so they get hooked up with a coach to kind of work through that. And it gives them an opportunity to kind of express, hey, this is the feedback that I'm getting. This is how I feel about it. And then we work through like, hey, what are you ready, willing, and able to do now to either, keep your job or, move on to something else or whatever it might be. But I see those things showing up then in the workplace, specifically, just off the top of my head.
Those are all so powerful. And again, like those personal things that absolutely do impact us at work, but it's really not coming up in their one-on-ones with their supervisor, right? But it does make such an impact. So to be able to be working with a wellness coach that is tending to those things with that individual, it's really powerful and it does spill over. Yvette, what are your thoughts on this? What have you seen coaching to performance at work?
Well, I would just completely agree with both Natalie and Brian and the value that, coaching can bring into the workplace. And I think with that comes just a lot of, greater self-awareness. And that's what coaching can really bring to people is that whether it's driving more awareness around how they can better care for themselves, outside the work environment in order to show up. Some of it is sort of maybe recognizing, sometimes a client will come to me and say, well, I'm really struggling with getting motivated to exercise, or I'd like to lose weight. But then we start talking and then they begin to realize that actually they're not sleeping, and that's impacting all these other areas of their lives. That motivation to maybe meet some of those goals that they have for taking better care of themselves, as well as their motivation at work. So I think that self-awareness piece is a real big driver of coaching, that coaching can bring to somebody, whether it's around those self-care areas or even within that work environment where, like Brian was saying, if they're struggling with a coworker or something happening within that space, becoming more aware of themselves and how they're interacting and moving through that environment can be really powerful with gaining some more tools for moving forward.
Totally. Yeah. Self-awareness is huge, right? Like sometimes I'll talk with these employers that are looking at bringing our program to their team, and I'll ask them, like, what would it feel like if 20 to 40% of your staff were more self-aware, were more mindful of how they were showing up both at home and at work? And it kind of speaks for itself, but it's worth highlighting just the power of that. That's awesome. Thank you so much. Okay. So what about retention? If employers are looking at bringing wellness coaching to their staff, how does the coaching container we have from that health and wellness perspective, how have you seen that translate to helping folks decide that, yes, this is where I want to be and I do want to stay? Or maybe sometimes we've talked a little bit in our coaching meetings of sometimes what we do is we kind of shake the bushes a little bit, and we maybe help folks realize earlier rather than later that this isn't the best place for them. And in my opinion, I think that's good for organizations because I don't want folks in my organization that don't want to be there and that aren't well aligned. And I want to get the right people in the right seats as quickly as possible. So in my mind, that's a really great thing. But let's maybe go in backwards order, and that will let you have the first word on this. What are your thoughts on this? Have you worked with folks that you have kind of seen them grappling with that question of, do I want to stay here? Is this the right job for me? Is this the right company for me? And how has coaching kind of supported them through those crossroads?
Yeah. Yeah, I think this is a place where a lot of times we might bring up kind of helping a person identify what their values are, what their beliefs are, what's important to them, both within their career and in their personal lives, and then having that information guide them in making decisions. And sometimes, if they do find that maybe their values aren't aligning with their current situation, it may not be that they need to leave that current situation. It may be, how might they what kinds of choices can they make, or what kinds of changes do they have control over that could help support them in creating a situation that does better align for them. Yeah.
Yeah, that alignment, the values, and these are things that like really good employers that are wanting to cultivate a positive and healthy culture in their company. They want people to feel like the work they're doing and the company they work in is aligned with their values. So yeah, we get to kind of like make sure that that's happening. We get to have those conversations. I love that. Brian, what have you seen with coaching impacting retention?
Yeah, I think a couple things. One is if somebody's kind of saying like, "Hey, I'm not really happy here," or maybe they kind of begin that conversation having a hard time at work and not sure if it's a good fit for me. One of the questions to ask is, well, what are the things that are keeping you there? And then they get to talking about the things that they really like about their job. And then I think specifically about, I remember working with a manager one time who was just going on and on and on about how terrible things were and how hard it was and how the communication was so terrible and yada, 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 yada. And I was like, well, I'm like, why are you still working there? And then it was like, well, I love the customers and I love my staff and and these are my people, and like I'm not going anywhere. Like I got to take care of these people. This is this is the neighborhood grocery store. Like I'm not going anywhere. And so then what it does is like through this process is it either like will affirm and confirm in them over time that like, oh no, this is the place I want to be. Maybe I just didn't make some adjustments to the way that I'm thinking about it or the way that I'm approaching it. Maybe I just need to, kind of consider what I'm grateful for. And then also during that process, we may say like, hey, well, what would you do different? Like, where do you think the grass is greener? And then as they get to talking, they realize that grass isn't looking all that much better somewhere else, right? Because they're still going to have to deal with the same things, and just in a different way. And sometimes they realize like, I'm the problem. I'm the one with the attitude. So if I go to the next place, I'm bringing myself with me. so can't get away from that, so then you got to go through that process. So I think that there's that piece of it where either people are confirmed in what they're doing and feeling good about it, or like you said, the other way can go where they realize like, man, I'm miserable here. This is why I'm miserable here. Everyone else on the team knows it too, right? It's a surprise to the rest of the team. Most people probably already know it's not a great fit. And so sometimes it just helps accelerate that process, like you said, which, and it may be somebody who's actually being toxic on the team. And so then they just kind of like filter themselves out rather than having to go through the whole process of doing that. So, but I will say, Danielle, I cannot think of one time where someone has been like fired up about their job and about their organization. And then through the coaching process, they said, I think it's time for me to go somewhere else. That has never happened in the hundreds and hundreds of people, thousands of hours of coaching that I've done. It's always been some level of dissatisfaction at the beginning that either turns into, no, I really want to be here, or it's time to find something else. So
yeah, thank you. It's so interesting to hear. Yeah, and between the four of us, there is a wealth of experience and number of coaching sessions that have happened. I will just say that. So I love hearing these stories and that these are really powerful, impactful conversations that are happening on an individual basis that is incredibly pivotal for that person. It's one of my favorite things of what we get to do is really make that impact on that individual level. So I love hearing that. Natalie, what have you seen with this as you've been working with folks inside of companies?
Yeah, I think to add on to what Brian and Yvette said, it also brings out some of those feelings of like burnout and stress that this person may be undergoing. And also, Brian had said like that space and time to talk with maybe those like having those tough conversations with a manager or a coworker that's causing additions to burnout or stress. So coaching really does allow that person to process, and it can really just help them to kind of see where they're at, and maybe there's a lot of avenues to go, but it helps them to kind of see that path more clearly. Even in their growth, like as an employee. So kind of looking at that professional development piece too.
Yeah. I think one of the biggest things that we offer as coaches inside of a company is offering that clarity, right? Helping people really get clear. What are my values? What do I have control over? What do I not have control over? And really starting to make some intentional choices from that place. Beautiful. Thank you so much. I love I love hearing your perspectives on this and appreciate you sharing.